Welcome to the San Diego Model Railroad Museum. I'm John Phillips. I'm one of the exhibit operators that works here in the museum. This used to be called the Electric Building, okay? And in 1978, this building, along with some other buildings at the same night, burned down in the park. This used to be the location up to 1978 of the Air and Space Museum, okay? So when this building burned down, the Air and Space Museum lost everything in it. They weren't able to retrieve anything. So the city made a decision to rebuild the buildings that burned down. The Air and Space folks decided to go down to the south end of the park, and that they're still down there today. And there were two clubs, the San Diego Model Railroad Association and the La Mesa Model Railroad Association, that approached the city and said, can we have this space so we can start a model railroad museum? And the city said yes. So that's how it all started. So the building was rebuilt, and it was probably done in 1981. The clubs came in and started building, and we opened our doors to the public in 1982. All the layouts that you see here in the museum belong to the individual clubs. So the clubs are responsible to build, operate, and maintain their own layouts. So all the folks that you're going to see inside the layouts today are volunteers for the most part, and they're responsible for running the trains that you see running as we go through the museum. There are 4 main clubs, okay, and there's 5 layouts inside. And we have one outside layout that's kind of in transition right now. This layout over here, which is an O-scale layout, this is what you would call a freelance layout. It's not modeling any particular part of the country in detail, although it does have a Southwest type theme. Now, on the other hand, the layout that you'll see over here, this is a model of the old San Diego, Arizona and Eastern back in the 1930s, the 1940s, and the 1950s. So when this club gets together and they're working on the layout, they're usually discussing where they're going to place the buildings, because there's still a lot of buildings that are left to be done, what kind of repairs need to be made, what kind of trains should they set up, how to make the layout that you see here more realistic so people can get a taste of history, if you will, of the real railroad, the San Diego, Arizona and Eastern. You'll see over here what we call some mock-ups. This white building here, a couple of the white buildings you see, they're called mock-ups. And what they are is just foam cordboard with pictures of what the structure will look like glued to it, because the actual structure hasn't been built yet. But they do the mock-ups because they try to get an idea if what they're going to build is going to fit. So what you're looking at here is part of downtown San Diego, and this road right here would be Broadway, okay? And if you look up above, you'll see a picture of what the area looked like in 1928. So that long, narrow building you see, that was the freight terminal. And it was in that location until the early 1960s, and then it was demolished, and the yard itself, the freight yard, moved down south of San Diego proper. Now you can see the actual picture of the, and I'll point it out to you. This is an overhead view of the station, which is still there today, okay? And this is a model of the old San Diego Gas and Electric Power Plant, which is that structure over there that they've done a mock-up on. So this club will be concentrating on putting buildings together to put in each of those squares And it's going to take them a number of years before they get all the buildings that were here in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s into those squares. That gentleman is running those 3 trains. He's making sure that they're running properly. And you'll see those black items up on in front of him right now. Those are the throttles that he's using to run the trains. The speed of the trains are okay right now, so he's not playing with them. Your layouts are not something where you just turn it on and walk away. You do have to pay attention to what's happening on it and make sure the trains continue to run. So that's a scratch-built structure. By that we mean this didn't come out of a box. Someone sat down in each one of those pieces of wood that you see that are making the piers under the floor you see. That was all glued and put together. The inside of the building is fully detailed, so if you look through the building window, you'll see the office area. Now, all the clubs usually have a sense of humor, so that's why you see a dinosaur being taken for a walk. See, they're still working here. Here, this is the area where it says the future home of the San Diego Police Station, way back in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s. Down at this location, they've got some blueprints. This club will make a decision to ask one of their members to build one of these structures. A lot of this is a hobby. Like when I was a kid, I was building models. You know, ship models, airplane models, and everything else. And you just learn to do it. The first model you ever make of a building like this probably wouldn't turn out too well. So you put it on the layout, and then as you got more and more experience in building the model, you might come back and take your first model off and build a better model of it. Nowadays, you're going to see computers actually printing out buildings. Our layout outside had some of the details on it printed out. Yeah, from a computer. Yeah. You've got to program that computer to get that level of detail. So there are some people that really like to do that. The breadth of the hobby takes into account everything. You'll have electricians that are working just on the electrical part of it. You'll have people that are just building the buildings. You'll have people that are painting the backdrops. We'll have people that are just doing the scenery. There'll be other people that'll just try to build the trains themselves as realistically as they can, following historical information as to what actually ran here and on what date. Okay, they'll have the engine number. They'll make sure that the engine looks like the engine that ran here on such and such a date. So it's pretty involved. It's a very social hobby. So this is the 22nd Street Yard over here. Okay, and that's still used down south of San Diego proper today. That's where a lot of the switching happens. So the train will come in and they'll break the cars up and take it to certain locations and everything else. Up on the hill, that is a model of the Tecate Brewery down at Tecate, Mexico. The old San Diego, Arizona and Eastern started in San Diego, went down to Tijuana, then went down to Tecate, then came back into the country near Campo, California, and then it went out to El Centro. And the reason they did that is it was easier to build the railroad down in Mexico, where you didn't have to build as many bridges and as many tunnels as you did in the United States. The scenery that you'll see up here on the hill from High Pass to Tecate, and over there in the far corner will be a representation of Tijuana. This is all landscaping and locations that you would see down in Mexico. This little building you see right here, that is a building that was just finished by a lady modeler. She's a member of the NMRA. Trudy Seelig is her name. and she just built that little shack there, and you see it's lighting and there's details inside and everything else. She likes to scratch build structures, so that's her thing. A resident DJ, Shotgun Tom Kelly. He is still broadcasting on Sirius XM. He got into it because his father worked here in San Diego on that particular engine. Over here we have more displays. Up here we try to give the visitors an idea what the different scales are. We have G gauge, we have O gauge, HO, N. We are planning to have a Z scale layout sometime in the future. HO scale, which is the layout I've been showing you here, this particular scale is the most popular scale. Within the National Model Railroad Association, 70% of the people were model in the HO. I mentioned to you on this layout that the railroad the railroad would connect to the railroad going up to Los Angeles. But the San Diego, Arizona, and Eastern would technically start here in San Diego, and it'll go through National City, and then it comes down to the border. And this is a representation of what the border looked like back in the 1930s. So it was a simple chain link fence. On this side, you'll see a model of a station that's got the United States flag there, and over on the other side, a similar structure with a Mexican flag. Now that structure that you'll see over on the Mexican side, that structure is still there today. This club to a certain extent, this club to a large extent that we haven't gotten to yet, will use pictures. Okay, and they'll use the pictures and then we'll try to model what the pictures are showing them. Today they're even able to use Google Earth. So there's a couple of tools that they'll use to give you that kind of topography that you see in there. Yeah. Once they came back into the country at Division, okay, the topography turned to this kind of topography you see here. Okay, there's lots of bridges, lots of tunnels, very sharp curves. This, in real life, for a real railroad to build is very expensive. Railroads really don't want to build any more than they have to get from point A to point B. So this is a representation here of the Carrizo Gorge, and then there's a trestle up there. That's called the Carrizo Gorge Trestle, made out of redwood. It's a historical landmark. It is the longest wooden trestle bridge built on a curve. So that's still there today. Now in real life, this part of the railroad is not operating because of rock slides and the conditions of the tunnels. So it would take a lot of money to bring this railroad, this part of the old San Diego, Arizona, and Eastern back to life again and be able to be used. There have been a number of companies that have tried to do it, but they never been able to make a profit on it, so they'll try for a couple of years and then they give up. Plaster was poured into rubber castings and pressed into the chicken wire, and then you'll see, in certain instances, you'll see actual real small rocks up there and everything else. This area that you see over here on this particular part of the layout, this is the area around El Centro. Now in particular, those yellow buildings you see over there is where the old San Diego, Arizona and Eastern really tied into the old rail lines, the Santa Fe rail lines, back when it opened in 1919. Those buildings, that's called Plaster City, because there's a narrow gauge railroad that they've modeled that goes back into the hills, and they pulled gypsum out of the mines up in the hills, and it comes down to those plants, and it's converted by the U.S. Gypsum Corporation into wallboard. And they're still doing that today. And what you're seeing here, these are the yards at Bakersfield, California, back in the 1950s. And it's really 2 yards. If you look at a real map, the 2 yards were separated by quite a bit of different distance. The yard that's closest to us, that is the Southern Pacific yard. Southern Pacific built the rail line, but after a while, the Santa Fe Railroad Company got trackage rights over it, and they built a separate yard over there where you see the train coming out of. That would be the Santa Fe yard. And then up here where they join, that's called the Kern Junction. Their track arrangement is so realistic that they can actually use the schedule of the real railroad to run this layout. Now, this yard will take anywhere from up to 10 people to properly run this. So what they'll do is the schedule would say train XYZ, or train number 100 would have these cars on it with this engine pulling it. So they've got to find the engine out of the roundhouse here. Okay, then they have to find all the cars, and then they have to put that train together, and then they send it out on the main line. So they have long lists of the cars and where they are in the yards, and they use those lists to build the train, just like the real railroad would. People who write in the National Model Railroad magazines consider this layout to be one of the premier layouts. We have a drive-in here. The kids love this. We have the classics, the Roadrunner cartoons. This is the portion of the railroad that was really done first, okay, in terms of being as complete as it is at this point in time. What's interesting about this place is along here you'll see the actual mile markers, okay, that they've modeled, okay. All the tunnels are numbered. For instance, that tunnel over there is tunnel 1/2. And the reason that's tunnel 1/2 is because originally the rail line was built lower near the creek, and it was following the creek up the hill, but it continued to get flooded out. So after the main line had been finished and all the tunnels had been numbered, the company decided, well, we're going to raise this thing, and then they put in this tunnel, and they had to give it a number, so it became tunnel 1/2. So the scenery you see here, if you went to this location in real life, this is what it would look like. Okay. Again, this is probably pretty realistic in terms of the trees and everything else. You'd get these kind of trees right down near the creek. This is what Caliente looked like in 1953. The rest of the city would have been over here, but part of the city would have been over there. That is a model, or that's a rendition of the rail line in 1925 up there. So you can see that big curve there. That wasn't modeler's license there. They modeled it the way it really looked. So the curve came back on itself and it started climbing up all the hills here. And that's a pretty good representation of what it really looks like, and still looks like today, because this railroad as a whole still operates today. It's the busiest single-track mountain railroad in the world. Back in the 1860s, the Central Pacific, which became the Southern Pacific, was busy building the first continental railroad this way. And Union Pacific was coming this way. They met in Provo, Utah. Okay. At the same time, Central Pacific was building in the center of the state here. So when they got down to Bakersfield, they had to figure out how to get into Los Angeles. Okay, California was settled by Spanish missionaries, really, from the south up. So the people that were here in Sacramento and the Upper Bay Area, they all knew that about Los Angeles and San Diego. So what happened is they surveyed, Southern Pacific surveyed all these passes in the hills here, and they decided to build the rail line from here to Mojave, and then it was built from Mojave to Palmdale, and then it followed one of these canyons originally into Los Angeles this way. Today, the railroad still goes this way, but it'll go to Palmdale, and then it takes what's called the Palmdale Cutoff, and it goes over here, and it goes down through the Cajon Pass into Los Angeles from the east end. There's Caliente right there. So again, as I mentioned, this is still running today. This is the main north-south freight rail link in California. Passenger trains go up this way, Amtrak goes up this way, and there's some traffic over here, but the main traffic is going right down the center of the state, through the pass, and it'll go to Barstow and then continue eastbound, or it'll go down here into Los Angeles this way. This bends all around here, and what the club has done, I also want to point out, you'll notice that there is the backdrop that you see over there, that's painted. They've had one guy who's painted their backdrop for them for over 40 years. The story I've been given is he doesn't even like to run model trains. He's an artist, and he comes in and he paints their backdrop for them. There are plaques at these locations on monuments. At one point in time, there were all these structures at Bealville, and if you look, you'll see the water tank there. When they were running steam engines and everything else, they had water tanks quite frequently because they needed to take on water to get the steam. Today, they don't need the water tanks because they're running diesel. So all those structures you see that are all painted yellow, all those structures were basically owned by the railroad. And the railroad people would stay there, and they would help service the steam engines going up and down. Today, almost nothing is there now except a memorial of what was there at one point in time. You'll see some weird looking topography there. That's the remains of tunnel number 4. In 1953, I believe, there was a significant earthquake in this area, and it destroyed tunnel number 4, and the railroad built a big, what was called a shoe fly around what was the tunnel, and they ended up keeping it because it was going to be too expensive to rebuild tunnel number 4. So what the club did there is they modeled the shell of the old tunnel there, just the way it is today. This would have been tunnel number 6 in this area, but what they did is they daylighted it. In other words, they took and destroyed the tunnel, okay, because trying to maintain tunnels is a hard job, so they just opened it all up and everything in real life, and that's what this particular club modeled after the tunnel had been taken out. This is a picture of the real location, okay? And they used this picture to model that section of the railroad over there. Concrete structures that you see here, here, and there, that's what you're seeing over there. The railroads went to diesel electrics as soon as they could because there were less moving parts. They didn't require as much, anywhere close to the amount of maintenance that a steam engine required. Didn't require big steam and water situations. The diesels started coming into being in the late 1930s, But what happened was, because of World War II, the government told the railroads, you go with what you got, so use your steam engines, because we're not going to allow most railroads to convert to diesels. But following the war, and by 1957, you would be hard-pressed to find a steam engine in service in the United States after 1957. The club themselves got enough money together to build the mezzanine out of their own pocket. Whereas what you've seen up to now was in place, started in the early 1980s. This, they started building this in 2000, and then they opened the mezzanine level around 2005. And within the last couple of years, they have finished the main line up here. There's some track work still to be done on some of the sidings, etc. And they still have yet to do a lot of the scenery work up here. So what happens is they have to go through a spiral easement. We call it a helix. So they come in at this bottom level that you see here. And if you look very carefully, you'll see a track right in the middle between the top and the bottom. And that's part of that helix where they get and they come out up at this level in order to properly orientate themselves to the rest of the railroad on this level. So it's kind of a height adjustment thing. The scenery that has not been done. Okay, on this side they're using styrofoam instead of chicken wire because they have a weight situation here. So the basic scenery is going to be styrofoam with a thin wash of plaster on top of it because it takes the color better. And you're able to do a little more with rock details because you'll be able to put plaster on top of plaster. The rasp, and they smooth out all the sharp angles here, and then they smooth it over with plaster, just like you see over here. So if you come over here, if you look very carefully, you can see how the styrofoam is laid up here. Now up here, you're going to see a lot of work on the backdrop. Oh, let's go up to go to the loop, up to the loop. Track tunnel, not a double track tunnel. So one train has got to go into a siding and the other train can stay on the main. The train that's on the main has now just stopped because he cannot go beyond that signal bridge or else he will risk crashing into that other train. Digital command control, which means they're running off basically these handheld computers that are talking to computer chips that are in the engines. Speed, direction, lights, bells, whistles, the whole 9 yards. But the reason they did this is they had to get enough elevation to get up and over the pass, and there wasn't enough space here to go way over here and then way over there with a switchback to keep going like you're seeing around here and everything. There wasn't enough room to do that in real life, so the engineer for this particular railroad came up with this brainstorm. And this is what they did. If you're wondering why there's a hole here, is because Paul put the scenery in before the backdrop was painted. So the guy who painted the backdrop stood in there and painted the backdrop, what he's done is he's tried to vary the height and the size of the trees to make it look more realistic. So he'll be planting trees all along here. When he gets done, he'll fill this in. And this is what how he's doing the plaster on chicken wire. Gets the wood support. This is the chicken wire. He fastens it to the wood support. The tape that you see there is the tape that you would use when you mud a wall, okay, for expansion joints. And then this is not the paper mache soupy whatever. This is plaster that is almost already set, and he just smears it on with his hand. Paint it brown, then he paints it with glue. And then he uses this. This is ground foam, and when the glue is still wet, he shakes this on it. So that's how he gets the greenery. Now he also ballasts the track. Fine ballast. So this is not the right color. This is a different section of track, but he's using gray along here to ballast the track. Ballast holds the ties in shape and location, okay? And the ties hold the rail engaged. So if the rail goes this way, the engines crash, or if it gets too narrow, the engines pop off. So that's the purpose of ballast. And the ballast isn't smooth stones, it's sharp stones and everything else, so that when they lay the ballast, the rocks will lock in with each other and keep that tie from moving around. The earlier layouts built right up to the edge of the wall, and they put the plexiglass and the glass in there because little kids being little kids, they'd reach in and take the train. But all this layout is set back from the aisle, and they can put this cast iron fence up. This could be almost called a Dispaters Panel, and it's a diagram of not the whole layout, but most of the main line. The top line is stuff that's downstairs. If you notice, there's a blue line in the middle of the panel. Anything above that line is downstairs. Anything below the line is up here. Wherever you see orange means that's where there's a train. Okay, so if you want to know where the trains are on this lane, there's a train at Illman right now, there's a train at Woodford right now, there's a train at Waylong, there's two trains at Marcel, one on the siding, which is the thin line, and one on the main line, which is the heavy line. If you look up here, you'll notice that it says the Pacific Desert Lines. Well, the Pacific Desert Lines was a railroad line that was designed but never built. Like the first HO layout that we saw, which was the San Diego, Arizona and Eastern. San Diego, Arizona and Eastern went from San Diego out to El Centro. Well, the Pacific Desert Lines was going to go from San Diego out to El Centro. It was designed to stay within the United States instead of going down to Mexico. What happened was they got the design down on paper, they decided what towns they were going to go through and so on and so forth. When they went out into the field to see if they could build it, they discovered they didn't have enough money to build all the bridges and all the tunnels they would need to build the real railroad, so it stopped. They hand-laid their track. So what you're seeing there is all those dark pieces. That is a piece of PC board that's been turned upside down so that the copper underlayment is showing, and they'll cut the copper underlayment to electrically isolate both sides, and then they solder the track to the copper the underlayment there. Okay, and then they do that every fifth tie, and then the white ties that you see in between are those are the end scale ties that they put in there, but all this is hand-laid track. So anyway, this is the 3 Rail Club here, and this is the crew that really gets into the holidays. So you push the upper button, and here goes the Polar Express. And if you push that button over there, you'll get Thomas to go. There you go. This layout belongs to the museum. What happened back in 2013, the park asked each of the museums to do something special for 2015 for the Centennial. Okay, and what happened was the Model Railroad Museum decided to construct this layout, and if you look around, you'll see these are some of the buildings you would have found in the park back in 1915. Okay. So against the back wall we have a model of the Botanical Garden building. Over here we have a model of the California Bell Tower, model of the Scratchbuilding Pavilion. This is a model of the trolley station that used to be up on Park Boulevard. Where Park Boulevard runs today is where the trolley line ran then. These are models of the Class 1 streetcars that were here way back in 1915. And this is G scale out here, so this is the big stuff.